"Start looking for a place, Dad. We're putting the cabin on the market." That's what my son said to me 3 weeks after we buried my wife of 41 years. He didn't look up from his phone when he said it, just sat there at my kitchen table, the table where his mother used to make him pancakes on Saturday mornings, and scrolled through something on that screen like he was reading the weather. I didn't say anything right away. I looked at his wife, sitting across from him, and she was watching me the way a person watches a door they're waiting to open. I said, "That's my cabin, son." He said, "Dad, it's a family asset. We've talked about this." We had never talked about it, not once. My name is Robert, and I'm 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a civil engineer for the county. My wife, Sandra, she taught second grade for 28 years. We weren't rich people, but we were careful people. We paid off our house in Asheville when we were in our 50s. We bought that cabin up in the mountains near Boone with cash in 2009, during the dip, because Sandra said the land would hold its value, and she was almost always right about things like that. Sandra got sick in February. By April, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer is like that. It doesn't give you much time to prepare. What I wasn't prepared for was how quickly my son, my own boy I'd coached in Little League and helped move into 4 different apartments over the years, could become a stranger to me. His wife's name is Denise. I want to be fair about her. When they first got married, 8 years ago, I thought she was good for him. She was sharp, organized, motivated. My Sandra liked her well enough, though she once told me privately that Denise had a way of making every room feel like a boardroom. I laughed at that. Sandra had a gift for seeing things clearly without being cruel about it. After the funeral, they moved into my house. I want to stop and say that again, because I still find it hard to believe when I look back on it. They moved into my house. It started as a practical thing, or at least that's how it was presented. My son called it the transition period. He said he and Denise wanted to be there for me, to help me through the grief, to make sure I wasn't alone. I was touched by that. I was genuinely touched. I'm a 67-year-old man who had just lost the person he'd built his entire adult life with. I didn't want to be alone in that house any more than I had to be. So I said yes. Within 2 weeks, Denise had reorganized my kitchen. I don't mean she straightened a few things. She moved everything. The mugs I'd had since the 90s were in a different cabinet. Sandra's ceramic rooster that sat on the counter next to the coffee maker, the one her sister had brought back from a trip to Portugal, was in a box in the garage. When I asked about it, Denise said, "I just thought we could declutter a little. It was getting cluttered in here." She smiled when she said it. My son was standing right there. He didn't say a word. I found the rooster myself that evening and put it back on the counter. The next morning it was in the box again. That was the moment I understood that something had shifted, and not in a direction I'd chosen. They took the master bedroom about a month in. My son came to me on a Sunday morning, very calm, very reasonable sounding, and explained that the guest room was putting strain on Denise's back. Something about the mattress, and that it would just make more sense for them to have the bigger room with the ensuite bathroom. He said I'd be more comfortable in the guest room anyway, because it was quieter. The guest room that Sandra had wallpapered herself in 2017 with that pale blue pattern she'd loved. The room that still smelled faintly like the cedar sachets she used to put in the closets. I moved into the guest room. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was being flexible, that I was prioritizing the relationship with my son over my own stubbornness. I told myself Sandra would have wanted me to keep the peace, but Sandra wasn't there anymore, and I was starting to understand that peace wasn't actually what was on offer. The cabin came up for the first time in late June. Denise brought it up over dinner, very casual, almost like she was mentioning the weather. She said she'd been doing some research and that the real estate market up near Boone was extremely strong right now. The cabins like ours were selling for 2.5 times what they'd gone for 5 years ago. I said, "That's interesting." She said, "It's more than interesting, Robert. It's an opportunity." I asked her what she meant by an opportunity. She glanced at my son. He was studying his fork. She said they'd been thinking about buying a place of their own, something bigger, something with a real yard, and that between the equity in the cabin and some other adjustments, it would be completely doable. I put my fork down very quietly. I said, "The cabin belongs to me, Denise." She smiled that boardroom smile. "Of course, we'd work all of that out properly. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in Sandra's guest room, looking at her pale blue wallpaper in the dark, and I thought about the two of them in my bedroom down the hall, already talking about the next move. I thought about a lot of things that night. I thought about the manila envelope in the safety deposit box at First National downtown. Sandra and I had opened that box together in 2018, a year after her mother passed and left her a small inheritance. Her mother wasn't wealthy, but she'd been quietly careful her whole life, the way people who live through hard times tend to be. She left Sandra a little over $280,000. Sandra didn't tell our son about it. I asked her once why, and she said, "Because I want it to be ours, Robert. Just ours." She said it the way she said most things, simply, without drama, like it was obvious. We put that money into a brokerage account in both our names, conservative index funds, a few bonds. We didn't touch it. We didn't talk about it much. It just sat there, growing the way patient money does, and by the time Sandra got sick, it had grown to just over $400,000. When she passed, it transferred to me. The account was already in both our names with right of survivorship. No probate, no announcement. Just a quiet transfer of ownership that showed up in my online account one morning in April, sandwiched between a confirmation email from the pharmacy and a message from the county pension office. I had not mentioned this to my son. I want to be honest about why. In the beginning, right after Sandra died, it wasn't strategic. I was grieving and exhausted, and I simply hadn't gotten around to it. But as the weeks went on, as the guest room and the ceramic rooster and the boardroom smile piled up, the silence started to feel like the right decision for reasons I hadn't fully examined yet. By the time my son sat across from me and told me to start looking for a place to live, I had examined them fully. The morning after that conversation, I called a lawyer. Not because I needed legal protection right away, but because I needed to understand what my rights actually were. A lot of people don't know this. I didn't know it as well as I should have, but a grown child has no legal claim to a living parent's assets in this country. Not the house, not the cabin, not the investment account, none of it. My name was on every deed, every title, every account. My son couldn't have sold that cabin any more than he could have sold the neighbor's truck. The lawyer, a patient woman named Patricia Gould, who'd been handling estate matters in Asheville for over 20 years, walked me through everything in about 45 minutes. When I told her what had been happening, she didn't look shocked. She looked tired in the way people look when they've heard the same story too many times. She said, "Mr. Calloway, what you're describing is a family that has confused generosity with entitlement. That's a very common confusion." She helped me draft a letter, a formal letter, from her office, on official letterhead. It wasn't angry. It wasn't accusatory. It simply stated the legal ownership of each asset and noted that any discussion of selling, transferring, or encumbering those assets would need to go through the proper channels, beginning with me. I didn't send the letter right away. I held on to it for a while. Meanwhile, I started making my own quiet arrangements. I called my financial advisor and moved the brokerage account to a new institution under my name only, which I was fully entitled to do, since Sandra was gone and it had already transferred to me. I updated the beneficiary to a trust I set up with Patricia Gould's help. The trust named my two nieces, my church, and a scholarship fund at the community college, where Sandra used to take continuing education classes in the summers. My son was not named in the trust. I want to be clear that this was not a decision I made in anger. I made it the way I make most decisions, slowly, carefully, with a lot of quiet thought. The truth was that I had a son who, at 43 years old, had moved into my house uninvited and started making plans for my assets without asking me. I was not going to reward that. I loved him. I still love him. But love and common sense are not the same thing. I also started looking at apartments, not because anyone had the power to remove me from my home, but because I had started to realize that I didn't want to live in that house anymore. Not the way it was now. Sandra's kitchen had been rearranged. Her bedroom had been taken over. Her rooster was in a box in the garage. I could fight to get all of that back, and I'd be within my rights to do it. But what I'd actually have at the end of that fight was a house full of bad memories and a son who resented me. I found an apartment in a building about 2 miles from downtown. New construction. 3rd floor. The kitchen faced east and got the morning light Sandra always said was the best kind of light to start a day in. I signed the lease on a Thursday in late July. I didn't tell my son. I told him the following Saturday morning, over coffee. Or rather, I sent both of them into the living room and sat them down and laid 3 things on the coffee table in front of them. The first thing was a copy of the deed to the cabin with my name on it, clear as anything. The second thing was the letter from Patricia Gould's office. The third thing was a key. A single key with a small blue tag on it that said Apt 3F in my handwriting. I let them look at the 3 things for a moment. Then I said, "I've found a new place. I'll be out of here by the end of next month. This house will be rented out or sold on my timeline, not yours. The cabin is mine and will remain mine until I decide otherwise. If either of you have any questions about any of that, you're welcome to contact my attorney." Denise said, "Robert, there's no need to involve attorneys." I said, "There's already an attorney involved. That's her letter." My son stared at the coffee table for a long time. Then he looked up at me, and I saw something in his face that I recognized. Not anger, not defiance. It was closer to the look he'd had when he was about 12 years old and had broken the window in the garage throwing a baseball and tried to blame it on the neighbor's kid. That moment when he understood that I already knew and that there was no version of the next few minutes that ended well for him. He said, "Dad, we were trying to think about the future, about what makes sense." I said, "I know. So was I." I picked up the key and put it in my shirt pocket. I said, "You can stay here through the end of August. After that, I'll need you to make other arrangements." Then I went to the guest room, where I'd been sleeping for the past 2 months, and I started packing, not frantically, not sadly, just steadily, the way you pack when you know exactly where you're going and you're looking forward to getting there. I moved into apartment 3F on a Saturday in September. My brother-in-law helped me carry boxes. My niece brought a casserole and a bottle of decent red wine, and we sat on my new floor eating out of the dish because I hadn't unpacked the plates yet, and I felt, for the first time since February, like I could breathe. The morning light in that kitchen was exactly what the listing had promised. My son called me about 3 weeks after I moved out. He didn't call to apologize exactly, but he called. He said things had been tense and he didn't want it to stay that way. I told him I appreciated that. I told him the door was open, but that some things would need to change before I felt comfortable spending real time together. I told him that Denise had put a ceramic rooster that belonged to his mother in a box in my garage, and that I wanted him to understand why that mattered to me. He was quiet for a while. Then he said he was sorry. I don't know yet if that sorry is the real kind or the kind that people say when they're sorry they got caught. I've lived long enough to know the difference eventually shows itself. I'm willing to wait and see. The cabin is still mine. I spent a long weekend up there in October, just me and the trees, and Sandra's old flannel blanket on the porch swing. The leaves were at peak that weekend, that deep red and orange that makes the whole mountain look like it's lit from inside. Sandra would have had 100 photographs taken by the end of the first morning. I took some myself. I'm no photographer, but I did my best. The brokerage account sits where I put it in the new institution, managed conservatively, the way Sandra would have wanted. I looked at the balance on my phone one evening, sitting on that porch, and I thought about what she'd said in 2018, when we first put the money away together. "Just ours, Robert, just ours." She was right about the land holding its value. She was right about the morning light being the best kind. She was right about so many things that I'm still discovering, the way you discover things a person left you long after they're gone. I closed the app and put the phone in my pocket and watched the sun go down over the ridge. I had kept quiet the way she would have wanted me to, and it had been exactly enough.